qualified tutor conversations. These have fast become a highlight of my week, and I think some of yours as well, because it gives us that opportunity to share our thinking. I met with a new member this morning who said that, hi Claire, nice to see you, who said what a treat it was to be able to come into a space where everybody was heard and seen and encouraged to bring their best selves. And that's what happened in this conversation. So we do have a special guest here today. My friend Lucy from Education Boutique is an expert on alternative provision. And alternative provision is a really interesting part of the tutoring world at the moment. And Lucy is frankly the boss in this area. So much that when Ofsted want to know what good looks like, they ask her. So Lucy, no pressure. So Lucy coming in and telling us initially about the area, and then we'll start exploring it together. So the reason why I gave you that preamble was simply because I want you to understand that this is not a listening session. This is a discussion.
Yeah.
So chat, unmute yourself, dive in, be a little bit raucous, bring your best selves, and let's see what we can learn and share together. Lucy, my darling, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I wondered if to start with, if I might be able to just do my little sea slug thing, just because I think it's a really good starting point
A
for this
session is not a
discussion.
session without a sea slug. You know that.
So if I just share my screen now, if
Helen Osmond,
that's
you arrived
okay.
just in time for the sea slug.
Yes, but this is a really important thing. So I'm just going to pop this on the screen, and bearing in mind, just to set the scene, that some of you will have joined the session today and you'll know quite a lot about alternative provision. Some of you will be joining the session because you're just interested to know about it. We're all at different chapters in our story, if that makes sense. And that's absolutely okay. But the most important thing, whether you're a real expert in alternative provision, like yesterday I did this session in a room of what I would class as experts, in alternative provision. It was like the Alternative Provision Conference in London. It was mad. It was really cool. It was really inspiring. But I said to people, whether you're starting whatever point you're on, even if you are a more experienced person, your aim is to inspire other people to understand alternative provision and SEN in the way that you do. So even once you personally know loads about alternative provision and how to support SEN learners and how to work with disengaged learners who aren't in the classroom, your job changes from just personally understanding to being able to inspire other people as well. So just kind of reflect on that before we start. Where do you think you are? Do you think you are someone who needs to improve your own understanding? I mean, we can all improve. No one ever gets, you can never know everything, can you? But I want to start off in true teach style, just to warm everyone's brains up, first of all. A really good sort of well, I guess it's kind of like my little how I began my journey and the way I always start the story off for SEN understanding with anyone. And that is to play a quick word association game, which I know a few people on this call and maybe watching this, if you're watching it live, will have seen before, but that's okay because that just shows different people who had different experiences and will have seen this before and will have a bit of a different understanding of it. So if I say the word sea slug, if you're here live with us, you can just unmute yourself. Can you just call out some word association, words, adjectives, describing words that pop into your brain when I say the two words sea slug to you? Julia, you can get people started.
Marine animal, brightly coloured.
Marine animal, brightly coloured. Cool.
Cold and freezing.
Cold and freezing.
Slimy.
Slimy. Yeah, we had that one a lot yesterday, actually. A lot of people said, I think because of the sea and the slug, like slimy, wet. Yeah, absolutely. Any colours that pop into people's mind? We've had colourful from D.
Grey colored, grey or black.
Grey or black.
Red.
Yeah, we had
I also think of vacations and holidays because I saw them when I was on holiday on a beach.
Perfect. So some people already know what sea slugs are, and that's really, really cool because that just shows you people who work in SEN will have difference of experience because they will have case studies and stories and personal stories that help them with their understanding. Now, yesterday it was really funny. We also had a lot of like brown and we had a lot of like slimy, disgusting things like this. And then we go on to see what these sea slugs look like. and they are incredible, right? And there's often like an audible sort of like gasp, you know, when people see these, if they haven't had personal story experience of seeing these. I mean, David Attenborough was the first time that I ever saw sea slugs, and I was just like, wow, you know, the word and then the reality is totally different. And doesn't that just show you with things like sen, with things like autism, with things like ASD, you hear those words and you word associate lots of different things, but often we word associate difficulties, right? And my aim, if you can go away from this little conversation this morning having one thing, it would be literally to please just always try and think with sen of the positives, you know, the things that are amazing about these individuals, because just because they're struggling academically does not mean there's not areas that they always will excel in. And so I just wanted to share that with you, first of all. So then I thought maybe if we just talk about kind of alternative provision, my starting reason with alternative provision would be that I'm a real sen specialist, right? A real sen specialist. I love it. I absolutely, well, autism is my thing, right? But that doesn't mean that people who get into alternative provision will all come from that experience. You don't have to be a sen specialist, do you, Julia, to get involved in alternative provision? So I wondered actually in the chat if everyone who's here with us, if you could just put like where you are with alternative provision. Is this something that you're interested in? Is this something that you're working in? And just because we have got quite a few people live with us, if you could just type that in the chat.
Can you define it? Can you define alternative provision? What do you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, alternative provision, if you think of it like this, it's where a child's needs can't be met by the regular school offering. So, what that actually means is we've got a couple of layers to it. Those of you who have been in school, and whether you've been an assistant or you've been tutoring in a school or a teacher in a school, you'll know about interventions, right? So that's like the first level. That doesn't really class that really doesn't come into alternative provision because that is still school-based intervention. So you have a child who's maybe struggling in a subject, let's say maths, for example. Now, the first thing that a school would do is they'd identify that that child is struggling in a particular area of maths, and they'd look to see what they could do. And there are many different strategies of interventions that schools can place themselves. But what happens if it gets to the point where, for example, that child gets so stressed about that problem in maths, or gets so stressed about, you know, their achievement in maths, that eventually they, you know, really shut down to the subject and maybe even don't even want to come to school anymore because of that. If a child's not physically coming to the school, how can the school support them with interventions? And that's where alternative provision comes in. It's where it's seen that for some reason the child can't physically get to the school that they're named as their named school, and it works on trying to reintegrate them. So I want to just be really clear, you know, alternative provision is a big part of the tutoring industry, but tutoring isn't alternative provision, right? If I just say that again, because it's a bit of a weird one, like tutoring, I think a lot of us think, oh yeah, we're tutoring them, we're teaching them outside of school, so we're tutoring them. That is not going to get funded for alternative provision, because a school is not going to fund something that is only providing school, and it could be local authority as well who fund this. A school is not going to provide this support just so a child is not taught at school. The aim is that they're reintegrated. Now, we know that some children find school such a stressor, and a lot of you probably have heard of maybe the Hebbian learning theory. If you haven't, I'll just quickly summarize it. What it says is cells that fire together wire together. So if you imagine school is causing a stressor. So imagine like the bell at school causes an absolute sensory overload for a child. If those things keep happening, that sensory overload keeps happening, school fires stress. School fires stress. Eventually, school is stress, and I want to fight or flight it. I will either choose to remove myself totally from that situation, or I might become, I might sort of fight the system. But I always think of alternative provision as a bit of a reactive situation at the moment. So many of you, I'm just going to have a little look in the chat now and just see how we're doing with everyone, everyone putting their kind of things in there. But it's really clear that we've got, like the aim of AP is reintegration. Yeah, thank you, Julia. That's exactly the point. Kamal, just to come back to what is alternative provision. Alternative provision is a way that we get the students back into school or back into a suitable setting. Now, just to break down the school, because a lot of people listening to me say back into school will think, but school's not the right place for everyone. That's fine. But you have to go on a journey with it. You have to try and reintegrate back to the same school. Then you have to maybe, if that does not work, you try and look at an alternative setting that might be able to meet their needs. And then the final, which would take a little while to get to this point, it could take between 18 to 24 months to get to this point. Some local authorities now, where reintegration back into a setting is not seen as possible, they are funding something called EOTAS, Educated Other Than at School. And that is where a child does not have a school named on their EHCP, but they are it's chosen that education at home is getting them the increase in academics that they need to go on and live a full and fulfilling future, and then that is named as their full-time provision. But you wouldn't get that for a student. EOTAS would not be even come into things unless you have an EHCP. But you can get alternative provision if you don't have an EHCP. So I know that's quite a lot of information. The funding side of things as tutors isn't always necessary for you to really, really understand, like really in detail. But I think it's important for you to understand what the intention for alternative provision is, because as an educator, as a tutor providing these services, that is exactly what your remit is and why you're being funded, if that makes sense. Julia, is there anything that you think after all of that?
No, that was absolutely stunning. And Kamal, I'm so glad that you asked that question. Thank you. That was really important and helpful. I would love to share with you a few of the insights on the group. Firstly, Dee said she would like more alternative provision students. And I said, why? And she said, because she feels like she's making more of a difference to those students. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same with anything, isn't it? If you've got a student who is totally disengaged, their beginning seems so much lower. And, it's almost like a dual curriculum, isn't it? You're not just helping them academically, but you're also helping them believe in themselves, find a pathway to the future, just kind of rebuild, like, who am I? I think that's a big thing that we find with alternative provision in terms of at school, you often don't have time to really get to know a student in that one-to-one way that we have the privilege of doing as one-to-one tutors. So I can absolutely understand that it feels more sort of rewarding in a weird, strange way, because quite often we're rebuilding children as well and young people. And then moving on. And I use this picture of, it's all about the foundations, isn't it? We get, I've got a picture of this house and it's like built on all these like weird, like rocky foundations that just don't look secure or safe at all. And I think the problem is with alternative provision, what you might find as educators is you're brought into a situation to do like whatever, 10 hours a week of English and maths with a student, right? And you meet that student and you think, do you know what? They don't need English and maths. They need therapy because there's some really deep rooted trauma here that we need to work through. And effectively, if you just teach English and maths, you're wasting that child's time because they're not going to retain it. They're not going to. And I've got a few other slides that I can sort of share with you just to go through some of the brain stuff on that if you want, but we can obviously do that later. But I do just think it's like, as educators, that then you're going to do English and maths, but you're more going to be thinking about the future, their aspirations. You're going to be looking at special interests. You're going to be looking at ways that you can just make them feel heard. And those of you that teach online, you logging on for that lesson is so important for that young person because they already feel forgotten, and you giving them that time. And if they're not feeling like it, just being like, no problem, well, you've got me between this time and this time, so even if you want to log on halfway through, just give me a message and I'll be there. It's really important, like you're their teammate, and I just think that that's so important that we don't underestimate that. And that's why I don't really think that tutoring is alternative provision. We deliver one-to-one education to help best meet these needs of these young people who believe they've sort of been forgotten in things. But you're not just a tutor, like you're so much more
Lucy,
than
I'm
that.
going to challenge you on this, and then I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who wants to contribute. But I'm going to challenge you on this because in the same way that we know that send practices would be super for every single learner, because we all need to be included in our ways.
Yes.
I would suggest that the mindset that you've just described of effective alternative provision should be the mindset of every tutor. And actually, we should always be going to where the child is and moving them forward from there. But I do want to call on what Sarah's just said about reactiveness. Sarah, do you want to dive in? And then Agnes, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say your name. Agnes, I'm going to call on you next.
Agnieszka.
Agnieszka, thank you. I'm going to call on you after Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I just my background is Senko, been a Senko for 10 years, and with tuition now left my Senko role and are purely doing sort of tuition stuff. But the thing for me is that it's so reactive for these children that you get to absolute crisis point before somebody will actually listen and help you. Whereas I feel if we have more opportunities for those alternative provisions where you can perhaps have it more like a flexi school type thing where they are able to dip in and out of school, so they can, like you say, if they need therapy, they can actually access that in a really safe and secure environment, which might not be in school. It might be that they need to go somewhere else to have that they don't have all of those sensory overload, or they don't have all those high emotions running as soon as they walk through the door in school. So I just feel that that getting to crisis point is not where we want to be. And yes, as a tutor, if you're able to support during the day, but I 100% agree with you, it's not about having the children out of school. It's about using it as a kind of a pit stop over a long period of time. So perhaps pit stop's not the right word, but having it over a period of time where we are trying to reintegrate them back into school, because we can't just keep allowing our children to reach crisis point before we do anything about it, or somebody offers us some help, because it's just infuriating. You're knocking on all these doors saying, we need help, where can we access this from? And every door just kind of closes on you. No, they can't go here, they can't go there, they haven't got this, they haven't got that. And it's just infuriating. So any type of alternative provision, and the more we know about it and where we can access it as teachers and tutors, I feel so passionately that we need to know where to access these things from.
Yeah, and I'm just going to share this picture because what you've described is this picture, the metaphorical red pencil. We are only supporting the students that really get to that crisis point, right? And that's firstly one issue, and we need to solve that issue. But then secondly, exactly what you said, everyone needs education about what to do, where to go. And I think exactly as you're saying, it's understanding that all the local authorities at the moment have this very closed off feeling from everyone, from teachers, from tutors, from schools, from everything. They have their own recruitment crises in the SEND departments and things. And so I would say probably just something useful to do here as well is to just identify the difference between an alternative provision setting, like a school that is an alternative provision setting, into that little basket, we'd also have things like pupil referral units, places that schools use as like behavioural respite, which that to me is not where you guys as tutors are going to be working so much. I mean, obviously some of you might go and work actually in a setting in an alternative provision school. That's one thing. But then there's the alternative provision services. And the problem, and this is a little bit of a problem that we see. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, we went to the alternative provision event, and there's loads of online options for these students. But as you'll know, as a SENCO, Sarah, a lot of the children that have the EHCPs, they will not get funding for online provision. It has to be in person for them. Yes. Now, there is a level of children that can, be supported online. They're the ones that don't have the EHCPs that stipulate that it's got to be in person. But it's such a juggle for the SENCOs, for the schools, to think, where do we go for this support? And I would say, I mean, obviously, lots of you might know that I have Education Boutique, and we are a service provider and an alternative provision service provider. But I also consider myself, like, the reason I'm talking to you guys today is I'm an advocate for everyone knowing everything about alternative provision, signposting. I will give up my time for free to support a parent who's struggling or a SENCO that's struggling, even if we're not providing the tutoring. I mean, Julia, will attest to the fact that I'll have conversations with anyone if there's a way that I might be able to help get some funding or get something into place for a child. So I think knowing those advocacy levels that would be able to provide that support, because obviously schools don't have a lot of, there are advocates out there where you've got to pay for them and things like that. But also, like, just getting to know your local area as well, like finding out, you can look on Ofsted reports now actually, and it will show you the names of the alternative provisions that are being used. But just bear in mind, it will only give the names of the settings. It won't give the names of the services, because as a service, we don't have a physical location, so we can't have a DFE number, which is, again, another problem that I'm trying to lobby the government about, because I believe that, you should have approved services as well. But at the moment, the DFE are in this mindset that if it's not a physical place, it's not classed as approved by them. And I think that's a problem in itself. But again, a bit of a
fantastic, rich exploration. Sarah, do you want to reply before I go on to Agnieszka?
No, I just really appreciate you giving your time to talk about alternative provision, because there's just not enough knowledge around. So get all those local authorities together, Lucy, and just give them all your information.
Actually, that's what I'm doing in January. So we're actually holding the first one actually in the area that we're doing the most work, which is in Berkshire, because there's lots of small local authorities there. So we're actually getting all the heads of SEN, all the caseworkers, all the local SENCOs from the schools, and a lot of the parents who are sort of advocating for their children as well. We're having a huge Meet the Providers Day. I'm like so excited.
Yeah, fantastic.
Hopefully we can take that around the UK as well and just do it every
Lucy
day.
only does the things that are exciting, hey? So brilliant. Agnieszka, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, there we are. Hi. So before I started full-time tutoring, I was working for 4 years in an SEN SEMH school. And kind of in comparison, because at the moment I work with quite a lot of children who are currently out of education, and most of them, they do have EHCP. And what I find, the main difficulty in comparison to actually working at school, is that once we have them at school, they are so much more established because they have access to therapists, they have access to different teachers. They kind of have to appear, because any lack of attendance would be straight away noticed. However, once you work with children who are out of education through agencies that got funding from local authorities, this looks a little bit different. Very often parents of these children, they have their own anxieties, they have their own mental health problems, and for them, suddenly when their child is out of school, having so many different people involved in their child is very stressful, and very often then find it very stressful to have these people in their house, because it's additional stress of having this house prepared and this child ready to learn, and they often have multiple children. So what I've noticed that very often these sessions just get cancelled. And it's so difficult to build this because first of all, once we work with children with who are out of education for a longer period of time, the main thing that we are doing, the first thing that we're doing, we're trying to build a relationship with them, because they have been already disappointed by so many adults in their life. So many adults already left, they don't feel great about themselves. So for them to even accept us as a next person, it's a big thing. And once there are gaps between sessions, it's very difficult for these children to actually believe that we are going to come back. And it's not their fault that these sessions are being cancelled. And it's not only this particular agency I work with, it's actually a few of them. So their policy is that once the parent cancels within 24 hours, the tutor gets paid for it. So there's a lot of money wasted. Of course, for a tutor, it feels fair, and it's a good way of kind of having consistent work. But there's so much money wasted on the side of these children, because before the local authority actually realizes that this child doesn't attend, it could be months and months and months of these children getting no education whatsoever.
So I just want to pick up on what you said there, if that's okay,
Yeah,
Agnieszka, because actually that shouldn't be happening. And what you've described there to me sounds like a tutoring company who is not really a specialist in alternative provision, providing tutoring for alternative provision, which sounds very complicated. But that's why I do not describe our service as a tutor. Like, for example, when you obviously maybe would do like a report that would say, or you'd put on your system that would say, you know, non-attendance, and then you give the reason, maybe it was a text from the parent or whatever.
Yeah.
If you're a proper alternative provision service, you would have multi-agency support around that role. So when that report went on, your school would get notified, the caseworker would get notified, and the consultant would get notified, all in that same moment that the tutor put it on. And then those tutoring companies should have policies of attendance, whereas if a certain, like say 80% would be the aim, right, of above 80%. So there would then be flags where, again, as a tutor, you may not see that, or it may be that the agency that you're working with is not doing those things and is more of a tutoring company doing alternative provision, rather than having those deep bedded roots with the local authority, the school that they've taken the role from. So I would say that sounds like an unfortunate, firstly, that shouldn't be happening. You know, if regularly things are being cancelled, as a school, as an alternative provision service, there will be thresholds, or there should be thresholds, where once they are met, it prompts, you know, certain things to happen in terms of safeguarding of the child. Because especially if that is an in-person, you know, for example, you know, if it has been stipulated that it needs to be an in-person provision that's provided, if you're not getting eyes on that child for say 4 out of the 5 days of that week, that's a safeguarding concern. So it sounds to me that potentially the experiences you had firstly might be, you know, obviously we do all know that there are many parents of SEND children dealing with quite complex mental health issues for understandable reasons, but I do think that, again, that's why I do think that there needs to be this sort of, there's tutoring companies and there's alternative provision companies, and there's a lot of people who at the moment are sort of trying to change their service, which was maybe geared up more for the NTP and delivering tutoring in schools, who are now going, oh gosh, how am I going to get so many hours, moving forward? Let's switch to alternative provision. Whereas others who have been doing only alternative provision for the last years are already there and have those deep rooted kind of relationships with the local authorities. So I think it sounds a really unfortunate situation, but that shouldn't happen, and that's not good practice. So we wouldn't.
I understand, but I think, Lucy, especially in London area, where there are so many children out of education,
Yeah.
and such a great need that it just basically gets lost in translation somewhere, which is so sad. But as I said, if it was my experience with one agency, I would just maybe think that they are not doing it right. But there are multiple of them, and it seems to be a common thing. That's why, and especially if a child doesn't have a school at the moment, so the only people really involved would be an agency, maybe a caseworker, and a parent, because school is not really monitoring it because there is no school at the moment. So I would say that's even more complicated.
But again, at the moment, because of last year we had this, Ofsted did this national kind of deep embedded sort of deep dive into alternative provision, and I spent 4 hours with one of the lead inspectors who was doing a focus on one of the local authorities that we work very heavily with. And partly, I mean, firstly, she came in and she was very interested to just learn more about the sector, which I found kind of quite unnerving, that someone leading a deep rooted deep dive into this would sort of not have that knowledge. But at the same time, as I say at the beginning, we're all learning, and we all want to encourage people to ask questions and learn. But at the same time, interesting. But I do think what you said there is it won't happen moving forward, because what you'll have probably seen, for any of you who are working in the sector, is some of the agencies where they are working more and more heavily with local authorities and schools. All the local authorities and schools have now been given guidance about doing certain checks and certain due diligence checks on their providers. And if you're working with providers who are doing things like not communicating attendance, they will soon not be providing that service, or they will soon have to change their service. So I think that's a good thing. That is something that's very happening at the moment. I mean, I'll give you an example. We work with 30 local authorities. I've had 3 of them in the last week say, oh, can we come and visit you in the next month, because we've got this list that says we've got to have done that. And I'm like, come on in. We're not a setting though, but you're welcome to come and have a nice coffee in our office. And they're like, oh yeah, we've just got, it's on our list and we've got to tick it off. And I mean, that's sort of a worrying conversation in itself, because you'd sort of think but obviously we have to understand that local authorities at the moment have huge issues with recruitment. So it's not their fault. We all need to do better, and we need to have these conversations, and we need to sort of look, things that have happened in the past maybe haven't been as good as they could be, and we have to drive towards positive change for the children.
I think that is such a positive and healthy response, Lucy. I think it's really, really lovely. That's how you took that, because it's complicated, isn't it? And there are so many fails, and there are people throughout that story who are struggling. So taking that positive approach is really, really important. And also that collaborative approach, and just bringing people in and showing them your best practice, I think is very, very generous. Which leads me on to MJ. I'm going to come to you in a second, but there's a couple of people in the group who have mentioned they're interested in getting some AP work, in working in alternative provision. And I believe we're talking about AP service, now that I know the difference between a service setting. So how could we, and please do mention Education Boutique, but how could a tutor firstly find alternative provision opportunities, and secondly, as you've just said, find the right alternative provision opportunities that are going to help them to do their best work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I would think, first of all, if I was someone who was interested, who hadn't done it already, maybe that a little bit of a problem that we see, and I hope no one takes offense to this, but people are interested in alternative provision initially because it's daytime. Bit of an elephant in the room, like, are you interested in it because of the children, or are you interested in it because it's money during the day? Genuinely, that is not a very nice thing to say, but it's true. I come across a lot of people where that thought process is the reason they're getting into alternative provision, I'm going to save you some time. It won't be for you because it's quite hard work. So you're probably better finding some online teaching, working with some international children if you want easy daytime work, like it's not going to be that for you. But like Dee said earlier, it's the most rewarding work that any of us do. So if you are interested in feeling that you take a child who literally is so disengaged, not just disengaged from school, actually, where earlier I said that people think school is not safe and then they fight or flight it. We hear a lot about this like trauma informed and all of this. Can I just say, trauma is not one big event. Trauma for a neurodiverse person is having to mask their way through everything for so long that they eventually lose who they are and they feel so disconnected from who they truly uniquely are that that is a trauma. And so sometimes understanding that it's not just working out, oh, what one big event happened to you that's made you not want to go to school? It's not about that. So your job as a tutor, if you're interested in working with a child and helping them find out who they really are and finding just even a little spark of interest in something, for the future, because if you can get them thinking about the future, then you'll be able to get them thinking about learning again. Because actually what the problem is with the school system is that because we place so much emphasis on learning happens at school, when you then don't go to school, and school becomes this sort of worrying, very, very, very anxiety ridden place, learning becomes the same and teachers become the same. So you'll probably, if you have worked with alternative provision before, have met those children and young people who you can't even call yourself a teacher. You can't even say you've worked in school because you'd lose them. And so like academics is not the big first focus for you. First, you need to find out what they're interested in. Then you need to try and find something that they might be interested in doing for the future. And then you need to weave in the learning and link it to everything that they want. So if you're a creative tutor, I actually think that primary educators as well really do have a big place in this market, because the students want to be taught in more creative ways. And sometimes we see very, very experienced secondary educators, but because they're used to working with students who are engaged and want to do XYZ, they sort of know how to make certain concepts a bit creative, but sometimes it's a struggle to really break it down to more, you've got to be a type of educator to be able to do that, right? So I think creative educators, people who want to make a difference, people who are interested in SEN, you don't need to know everything about SEN, or particular, ASD, ADHD, all of these different things, PDA, but you've just got to want to learn more. I would say they're the best alternative provision educators. And I'm going to say it, you don't have to be a qualified teacher either. Some of our best educators are teaching assistants and background like that. We do not say that you've got to be a qualified teacher. I'm a qualified teacher. I look back on what I was taught at my, in my degree. I couldn't tell you how wrong I think it is what I was taught to now what I do.
There's lots of smiles and nods in this room right now.
Yeah. And so if you're, as long as you want a child to build, I just think it's crazy. I'm a human who wants to help another human be passionate about life, and that's basically it, and want to learn stuff, and they're going to be the best educators. And people also, another big thing, it's not about you. It really isn't about you. If you're like, this is how I do this, if I've taught for 20 years, I went to this university, don't care. Child's not going to care either. You'll lose them in 2 seconds. It won't be for you, so save your time, kind of thing. So yeah, just very humble people. They're the people who would work well in alternative provision.
That was beautiful. Thank you. MJ, I'm going to call on you now. And then after that, Cecile has a share that is close to my heart. So go ahead, MJ.
Okay, it was mentioned earlier about the agency that it went on for. months, and the tutor was getting paid. I started tuition about 8 to 10 years ago. Hated at school every single minute of it. And that did happen to me. But I kept saying to the agency, this child is not engaging. In fact, I watched the whole of the first 2 series of The Crown with her grandmother. And eventually, even though I was so inexperienced, sorry, I phoned the local authority and I said, this is actually such a waste of money. What are you going to do about it? And, no, carry on. It was a tick box exercise. But having said that, I don't think that happens now. I think there are much more checks in place, and now the reverse is happening. So, and Lucy, you said it's never about you. No, it isn't it's not about you, it's about the child. And tuition for me is also, although there's a lot of work that goes into it, when I actually get in front of the screen or inside the student, it's actually a stress release. But I live in Kent. We've got a large proportion of foster children, and not enough foster carers. And what I'm finding is that the local authorities are starting to want kids to go back into school if they're suicidal. I'm registered with about 3 different agencies, all who have their correct safeguarding in there, if anyone knows what I've also experiencing. But so they say, right, this local authority assignment, putting your name forward for it. And then I'll get a phone call. MJ, do you remember that local authority assignment? That put you through in October, and this is now March. Are you still available?
Actually,
No.
I'm going to pick up on that because that's something that we see quite a lot. And that's not actually, you'd be surprised, it's not the fault of the agency. Everyone seems to hate us agencies.
It's the local authority.
But it's not even. So it comes back to, and I'm very keen with all of this that we keep it a very positive conversation, because it is very easy for us to always point at the local authority and say it's their fault. But what we see is what will have happened probably in that situation is we ask the SENCOs, we ask the local authority caseworkers to give us the information proactively, sort of tell us what's on their radar, what's going to panel that week in that, in with those students. So they might sort of initially ask an agency about a particular job. What we then see is a lot of, because you mentioned the children in care that looked after children as well. What we see is there's a lot of movement of students across boundaries, across borders. So what might have happened in that time is that pupil has been moved to maybe a care home in a different borough. Maybe that's been an unsuccessful placement, and then they've come back and they've thought, oh, because, we'd spoken to you before, we'll ask you. So sometimes I think, and that is a really important point, because as tutors, we need to do better, as agencies, we need to do better to communicate, what's going on to tutors. Obviously, it doesn't really, you need to know who you're going to turn up to teach and have all the clear information. That's why the onboarding of a new pupil onto, working with a tuition business or an agency or whatever is so important. We ask so many questions because we have to be able to try and give you as much as possible. We know sometimes that's like getting blood from a stone, asking for, and also the information sharing needs to be better across multiple agencies, across the local authorities to the schools and everything. But I think that just, picking up what you're saying there, Mary Jane, about the sort of the time spans between jobs and how that comes about, it's probably because those students are moving out of area to different care places. Maybe that's been an unsuccessful placement for some reason, then they've moved back to maybe a family member in the area. There's all sorts of issues there, and that's where, yes, it can get a little bit frustrating. It seems that so much time goes on. I think I saw it in the chat as well earlier. Someone was saying the waiting list for things like CAMS is so long. But remember, with alternative provision, guys, that alternative provision can be funded when there's not an EHCP. It doesn't need to be an EHCP gets you funding. There's all these different types. Obviously, the school and the obviously us as an advocacy service will be supporting the school to take that child's reintegration plan to a SEN panel to get that extra funding. There is a little time lapse there, but you know, as long as you can get a place on the SEN panel at the local authority, which we know they get very full at the moment, it's really important just to sort of mention that as we're.
I think that the funding question is probably an entire another session.
Yeah.
But I
However,
really commend your, you know, somebody mentioned, I think Sarah mentioned here in the chat about communication and that we need better communication between all the different stakeholders. And from my point of view, I get 400 messages from my children's schools every single day by WhatsApp and email and on their app, and sometimes even through the post. And so it's not a question of more so much as better, but I really do feel that your advocacy and your raising of awareness for what's available out there is crucial right now. Because when you spoke to the school leaders of my child's school, Lucy, you were facing somebody who was well-meaning but didn't know what they didn't know.
Yeah.
And so these conversations are designed to do that. We're not even dispelling myths. We are simply exploring unknown terrain, because when we can go out there and advocate for our students and tell parents and tell schools what is available to them, then our children have a fighting chance. Sarah, I'm coming to you in a second. I told Cecile that we were going to come to her next. Go ahead, Cecile.
sorry, can I just finish off? Lucy, that has not been my experience. I have close relationships with those agencies, and I know that those placements have not changed. And that's not, because it had nothing to do with the fact that the kids, they are still in the same place, and it can be a matter of months. I think it's Kent is actually a particularly bad local authority.
Yeah, and
Okay,
I think, you know, that is a really important point, Mary. It's not about necessarily that it's bad, because what is bad, we need to drill down deeper. What that probably means is they're struggling for caseworker turnover. So caseworkers will be flipping and turning all the time.
Yeah,
they get there on the first day, they get given 250 kids, and they're like, the first person they ring probably cries down the phone to them because they've probably not spoken to anyone from the council for months, and they're like, it's a horrible job for people at the moment working in those things. And we need to do better. You know, as the eTeach group, we're trying to really, really show and work with councils to, you know, attract talent to go and do these roles that are so important for our students.
thank you, Sue.
What an amazing thing, Lucy. MJ, I'm really glad you jumped back in with that, because it turns out that we've got lots of Kent people in this room who have had similar experiences. Cecile, please go ahead.
Sorry, can I just lighten the mood a bit? My daughter, the youngest one, is training to be a social worker. So in Kent, and I said, you know, what's happening with the tuition? Oh, I'm not going to swear, but it's said that she said, oh, there, word beginning with S.
Thank you, MJ. Does that, I'm not sure that, go on.
But I do think that what you're talking about there, social care is different to SEN departments. So
No,
I know they're totally different. Like, we can be funded by social care, we could be funded by SEN, but they are totally different.
She's basically saying that's the reputation.
Thank you, MJ.
Thanks. Shut up.
Thanks. Cecile, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, so my experience is personal, really. My son, a couple of years ago, seemingly sort of out of the blue, found himself unable to go to school. And I say unable rather than unwilling, because he was unable to go. Exactly. He couldn't. It was can't, not won't. No EHCP, always been fine. I think probably it was sort of a combination of factors to do with the pandemic and some physical illness that he'd had. We had, all the things that you've mentioned about, that we asked, is there one particular thing that's happened? It wasn't one particular thing. He just suddenly, or seemingly suddenly, felt unsafe. The word that he kept saying was that he felt unsafe in school. School were kind. They tried to help. They tried to put things in place, but none of it worked. There was mention of an alternative provision in our local area, but I suspect that he wouldn't have qualified, and he didn't seem to like the idea. So in the end, we felt that the only option was to take him out and home educate, which is what we've been doing now. And I'm pleased to say that he's massively better, and now has a couple of GCSEs and is working towards a few more. So yeah, I mean, I suppose the point of this really is just that, hearing what you say about the length of time that it would have taken to get some support, we would probably only be looking at getting something now. But
well, I think you shouldn't. That's the thing. So really great to hear that he's doing so well now, but this is my huge bugbear. Like, families like yourself shouldn't have to be going down the elective home education route. Now, it's wonderful that you're able to, and that is absolutely, it sounds like he's, that's great. He's got some GCSEs already under his belt, and wonderful. But you shouldn't have to be, and, a lot of parents, then you're having to pay for those GCSEs yourself. The school aren't going to be helping you, because as soon as you electively home educate, and this is really important, even for those students with an EHCP, if you take them off roll with your local authority, you are financially responsible. And I see this all the time, that families, even with families with EHCPs, they think, well, I've got this EHCP, so if I just home educate, I'll use that money for this. No, that is not how it works. So maybe 5 or 6 years ago, like kind of when I started tutoring, actually about 8 years ago, EHE was like a really big thing, and it was really, it's still a big thing. It's growing, ever so much, but people have to understand. I see.
Sorry, there was an acronym that you said there. I think it was elective home education.
Elective home education, sorry, EHE, sorry. So yeah, I see that so much, that people think, oh, well, I'll just use that funding that I know the school are getting for my child, and I'll home educate. That's where I mentioned the EOTAS. You're absolutely right. You should have got some, after your child has not been to school for 4 days, your school has a duty of care. And again, now it may be dealt with differently to back when you were dealing with it, because there has been a huge improvement in this in the last sort of 2 years. So was it about a year or two ago that this was?
It was a couple of years ago.
Yeah. After COVID, I have to say there was a lot of families who really weren't supported in the way that they would be supported now. So, it's really, all I can do is, on behalf of the education system, apologize that has happened to you. But what would happen now is that after 4 days of not going to school, your school has a legal responsibility to provide a full-time education. He's on roll, they have to do it. Now, some schools will start by offering a reduced timetable, right? There's, you can just come in for some, and then we'll set you some work. Problem is, if you mentioned that he didn't feel safe, that's the burnout. That's someone has not noticed the signs at school that there is a child internally. We talk about external fight or flight, and we have internal fight or flight, right? His cortisol has been so high for so long, for some reason. Maybe he can't put his finger on a specific reason. Doesn't really matter. He's been cortisoling away in the background, if you like, and eventually he's just reached a burnout. And that's it, because he's been an internal fight or flight for so long that then it's reached this, I can't do it anymore. You know, the external, I'm flying, I'm not going back there. But if someone had provided a small, so from day 4, they should be providing something. I don't know if they offered you, say, like a reduced timetable. The problem I have with a reduced timetable is if I'm terrified of skydiving and someone says, don't worry, you can just skydive for a little bit less time, that does not help me. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
well,
my terror
completely
is
agree. Yeah.
just not going to be affected by that. It's like saying, you know, like you're scared of swimming with sharks. Don't worry, you can just do it for half an hour instead of 4 hours a day. It does not make a difference. So my problem, and I think the big message I do try and get out there, is reduced timetable is not alternative provision, firstly, but also people say, oh, well, we just need to try that to see if they need alternative provision. It should be the other way around. We should be getting some, you know, something like a home tutor going in, because the focus is that first you'd have that person that would come to the home and they'd be like, okay, look, I know that you're really struggling. Let's try and work on what, you know, what do you want to do? Like, what can we, you know, sort of focus on for you? Like, let's think about the future. What's important to you? Let's try and forge that path to the future. And quite quickly, you'd probably be able to get about 80% of pupils back into school. That's my point. But that doesn't happen. We're left way too long to that point of burnout. And then it's like the schools don't do anything to help if they don't understand, because part of that is part of what we have to do is educate the schools. And it just gets to a really, really bad point for everyone. Now, like, your story is obviously not a unique one. It's incredibly common. But your story is what I hope in 5 years we can stop, basically, because we should be able to put in place home learning that then reintegrates them back into doing some lessons at school, some points of the day. You know, most students would be able to say, do you know what, I don't mind history on a Friday. I'd go in for that. You know, I would. The problem that we see with reduced timetables is they say, oh, just come in the morning, but they've got 2-week timetables. Then they do lesson 1 of geography, then they miss 3 lessons, then they do lesson 4. The sequence of learning for these children on reduced timetables is just broken. And then you're anxious, and then you're like, oh, I'm going into an English lesson, but I haven't done the homework and I haven't been there for like 3 weeks because I missed Tuesday, Monday, all of these things. It's bonkers. So we have to think about, again, that's a one size fits all model. Or just come in the mornings, or just come in for this. It'd be much better that you just came in for English lessons. Now, I know then for a parent that's a nightmare because it changes every 2 weeks, and then there's this and this and this and all of that. But we have to do better with things like that. So, you know, it's brilliant that your son is doing brilliantly, and you know, he's probably found himself in a lot more calm and isn't in that constant state of internal fight or flight, which is brilliant. But I hope that there are not so many of these stories in 5 years' time, because that's what we need to do in the alternative.
Amen, sister.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
is
I think
so
probably the
exciting.
change that needs to happen is a lot more radical in our education system.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but
at the same time, we can't really control that. But what we can
No.
control is the AP sector. And I think by forging the partnerships, doing all the talking, being the people to signpost the SENCOs to where they need to go, be that link between the local authorities, be proactive. That's what we can do at the moment. And that will see a change, because we've already seen it change in the last 2 years. I think the thing is that lots of people are coming into the alternative provision sector because of all the craziness in the tutoring industry with the NTP for the last 2 years. Everyone's been really focused on that. Those of us who have been in the AP sector for ages, we've seen a huge change, but everyone's just joining now, if that makes sense. So that's why they
Lucy, I have to wrap us up because we have to
Yay.
finish on time. That was a really healthy, helpful exploration of alternative provision. I think we've give me a thumbs up, please, if you agree, because I'm running out of time. I think that we gained a lot, we learned a lot. We're more able to advocate. We're more able to notice what good looks like, and I really wanted to commend us all for staying on the positive and for staying so empathetic with the needs of our learners and the practitioners involved, because there's a huge crisis here and all the people involved are important, adults and children. And so we need to step forward as supportive people in this space. Thank you so much for participating in this presentation. Lucy, I look forward to the next time. I will see you guys all next Thursday, if not before. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dee. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, MJ. Thanks, Agnieszka. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Cecile. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Emmy. And thank you, Lucy. Have a great day.